In this episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review over 90 images from 40 photographers. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. Now for the past 2 or 3 years I've been reviewing photos of my friends and colleagues, and because it was very popular we decided to offer it to our photography community here at Clever Photographer. Now we receive hundreds of images, and that's the reason why we had to limit the entries to 1 or 2 pictures per week per photographer, and that's the same reason why we take the show and usually divide it between 2 or 3 different parts. In the first parts we usually look at the landscape photographers, and in the other 2 parts we look at the rest of the photography styles. Now because we have many pictures to go through, we're gonna jump straight into it, but before that I have 2 reminders for you. First of all, don't forget about our Facebook photography group. It's called Clever Photographer Academy, and it's a place where we talk all kinds of photography. You can head there, search for us, Clever Photographer Academy on Facebook, and you can join our competitions there. You can ask us any photography questions. You can get reviews of your photos throughout the week, and just really join us for photography talk. So don't forget to head to the Facebook and join us at Clever Photographer Academy. Now the second thing is we have to look at the last week's photographer of the week, so let's jump into that. And yes, here comes your popular part where we look at the photographer of the week from the past episode. So now we're talking about 17th of January, and after quite some time we were able to recognize a macro photographer for our photographer of the week award. So the award goes to Guido Lieben, who is from Belgium, and Guido has been photographing for over 50 years, and obviously he covers many different photography styles, but it is really the macro photography and specifically the butterflies we were really struck by and we loved in the last episode. So I'm here on his Instagram, and again, as I mentioned, there is obviously lots of different photography styles, but when I scroll down and show you some of the butterflies, the incredible captures, the incredible details, and very lovely technical skills together with the composition skills really made his picture stand out, and we were really happy to recognize his images throughout this weekly award. So if you want, make sure you head to Instagram and check out his Instagram profile here at Guido Lieben, or you can also check out his Facebook page under the same name. So Guido, thank you very much. Congratulations for your incredible work. Please make sure you send us more pictures in the future. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to become our photographer of the week, all you have to do is to join us for this show. If you want more information about it, head to cleverphotographer.com/review. Find out the upcoming dates, the links, the information about how you can join us. And first of all, this is a great way to learn more about your images and how you can push your skills forward. And second of all, you can get the opportunity like this where you can join us and become our photographer of the week. And here we are in the first part of this week's photography review show. In this first part, we're going to be looking at landscape photographers. We have 19 landscape photographers to look at. So we're gonna quickly jump into it. Just a reminder, make sure that you like this video, leave us a comment, and also follow this channel so we can make sure that we continue creating content like this. But anyway, without any further ado, we are right here inside of the Lightroom CC. This is where we review the photos, and as you can see, we have all the photographers ready here. So we're gonna start by Ad here. So Ad sent us one image this week, and we're gonna look at it right here. So Ad, just a kind of first impression, really like it. I think it's very smartly done. Love the nice foreground elements, the church, as well as the background. Also really like the texture in the sky, and the whole combination and the feel of the image looks good to me too. So starting with the technical part of the image, let's have a look at the information. So we have some data here. So you're using Fujifilm camera, and your settings were ISO 160, 23mm camera, f8, 1/13 of a second. So looking at the settings, I think they're all good to me. Obviously, with the ISO, always the push is to stay as close as 100 if possible when it comes to landscape photography, to make sure that we don't introduce any additional noise. Then f8 is perfect. Obviously, with having the stones a little bit closer to you, you want to make sure maybe in the live view or when you take a picture that everything is sharp the way you want it. But most of the cameras with f8 should be fine. And then 1/13 of a second, depending on what you are doing and what the camera was showing you, I think is a quite good choice. So I think technically, looking at it, the sharpness is there all the way through, even including the mountain. That's really cool. What I also like is that you got some details inside of the clouds and so on. Quite often, they can kind of become like a blob of white nothing, which in your case, it's a little bit transparent and it's quite cool. So I like that too. The overall exposure and the details, I think, works very well here. And it's quite nice light, you know, not everything has to be always shoot during the sunset. As long as you have a little bit of drama, a little bit of diffusion, when it comes to light, I think it works quite well. So when it comes to technical part, well done here. Now, when it comes to composition, I think it's also very smartly done. Obviously, you have a church on the side here, working as the kind of main element, adding a little bit of character into the scene. As I say, you have a quite smart foreground element, which if you would have gone any lower, I think the scene would become a little bit busy. But looking at it from this view and looking at the character of the foreground elements, I think they actually works quite well, adding a little bit of depth into the image, which works very well. And then obviously this rock with the church helps to add a middle ground, and then the mountains at the back adding a really nice background. So altogether it creates quite complex scene, which I think works because it's simple enough but not really. I think altogether it's really cool. Now when it comes to framing, I would have cropped it maybe a little bit tighter, but that's just me. I think maybe slight part up here, and maybe some of the stones are not necessarily 100% needed there. So I would maybe go for the 16 or 9 and just either go for maybe something like this, and then really kind of push into the image and kind of focusing on what's really important, making almost kind of panoramatic. But either way, I think what you done works well as well. It's just obviously when you see, when I zoom in into that 16 or 9, look at the difference, how much the church becomes much more dominant part of the image. So suddenly the church is really important there. Maybe also one thing you would want to check is the geometry to make sure that the church is straight. So maybe not this much. Let's have a look if we just quickly use this straightening tool here and here. Yep, something like this, and then adjust the crop again, just really making sure that the church is straight, and then really kind of making it even more dominant part of the image. Other than that, I think as a composition goes, it's really well done, and there is not much I would tell you. Some of these things I was mentioning are more as a tips and more a kind of personal touch rather than being wrong. I don't think composition wise there is anything necessarily wrong with the image. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I really like this kind of almost blown out feel of it, this kind of minimal white, when the whites are really pushed out and then the contrast is created by the other colors like the brown and the dark. I think that works really, really well. Let's just kind of bring this down a little. I think what would help would be maybe a little vignette just to kind of close the image a little bit more. I would also maybe create little bit of a local adjustments. So you can use this linear gradient in Lightroom and just close the sky a little bit more. Again, bring in the focus in the center of the image. You could also use a brush for that, and maybe you do a little bit of dodge and burn and just basically paint some darker areas in certain parts of the image. So maybe to do something like this, and maybe at some parts of the roof, maybe, and then adding another one and maybe actually brightening some parts. So to do something like this, something like this. That's just a kind of some different ideas of what you could do. Again, I quite like the edit. I think it's actually quite nice. And it comes across very cool. I think it would look great printed, and in overall, well done. I really love it. So thank you very much for sending us this photo. If you have more, make sure you send them next week. And until then, take care. Moving on, the next photographer, we have Alan here. Alan, we have 2 images from you. So talking about first impression here, starting with this one, it's a little bit tight. I quite like the foreground element. However, I think it creates almost like a frame in frame, which kind of brings this down. What I'm not sure 100% is the white balance. I think it's a little bit off. Some parts also seems to be a little bit overexposed, but we'll jump into that in a second. When we're talking about this one, I think that's all really nice scene. Also, it seems like a really big file. Let's have a look at it. 38 megabytes, so maybe it's even a raw file, and a raw file it is. And this one is much cooler. Obviously, really nice leading lines, really nice kind of composition. So we'll have a look at it in a moment. So let's stick with this one for the moment. So again, I think we're looking at the raw file here. Let's talk about the technical part of the image. So shooting wise, ISO 100, f11, 1/40th of a second. So ISO 100 is spot on. f11 make complete sense, especially if you had something very close to the camera like this. 1/40th of a second, really depending on the light and what the camera was telling you. So that should be fine. Usually around 1/40th, 1/50th of a second is about as slow as you should go when it comes to handhelding the camera, but you maybe had a tripod. So when it comes to these settings, that seems to be all good. Now, obviously, this foreground element seems to be out of focus, which could be also done purposely, and I think in that case it works quite well. Now, when we look at the rest of the image, obviously these parts are all sharp, including the canyon all the way, so that's quite cool. And the light is a little bit harsh. You can see how some parts are a little bit blown out. Let's just quickly have a look. When I look at the whites here, and I hit Option or Alt on your keyboard, you see everything what's not black is basically a little bit overexposed. Now, you can bring some of it back by bringing down the whites and maybe even bringing down the highlights a bit. And then you recover quite a fair bit of the details there, but you just want to be careful when pushing the whites, because if you would print it like this, lots of these parts would be just pure white. Now, technically, other than that, I think it's fine. I like what you've done with the depth of field. I think it works quite okay. And all in all, we'll have a look at the white balance in editing, so quite cool. Now, looking at this picture and talking about technical skills, let's have a look again at the details here. So Nikon D810, ISO 250, 20 millimeters lens, f13, 1/100th of the second. So ISO 250, I wonder if it brought any noise, maybe a little bit in the sky and kind of in overall. Also, it's giving you a little bit of kind of glow, for example, around this stone, which is quite interesting. But there is a bit of a noise with 250. Nothing crazy, nothing what shouldn't be able to be removed, but there is a little bit out of it. F13, again, obviously trying to probably push and make sure that everything is sharp, which really work here. I think there is a sharpness all the way through, starting from the grass all the way through the rock, so that works all right. And 1/100th of a second is fine. You still have a nice details in the sky, so all in all, it's quite good. Now, when we talk about the image, just from what we kind of see, I think the noise is probably the main thing I would be kind of focused in. And the second is why you're getting this kind of glow around the rock. And also around the kind of trees, it's a little bit visible as well. So that's either something to do with the camera or with the post-processing. Sometimes when we push the post-processing a lot, it kind of creates these kind of artifacts. You can see it a little bit around this rock too, but not that much more around this one. Now, talking about composition, while we at this image, I quite like it. Now, what I like really is the leading lines here. I like these rocks because they actually create depth of field, so that creates nice feel as well. The flow of these waves also help. The sky with the texture being positioned like this, I think works really well too. I wonder if you would have just cropped it a little bit more, and it's cropped already quite a lot when I look at it, but maybe even going for something like this, that's maybe where I would look at it. Obviously, with the exposure, what does auto exposure tell you? Around 44. So I wonder if you would have stick somewhere around 1, if it wouldn't be a better choice. Now, looking at your whites, you're putting them in a minus. I wonder why. Generally, when I do landscape photography, I usually kind of check the... let's reset it. Let me show you. I usually push down the highlights somewhere and I keep an eye on the sky. I see what this does and I just want to see what I like. When I go all the way, they become really defined and textured, and it just depends if you like it or not. So in your case, I would go more somewhere around here. Then with the shadows, I keep an eye again on the image, and I don't want to go all the way 100 because everything becomes bright and flat. So I usually go as far as I like. I like to see details pretty much everywhere, but not overly bright. And then I hold Option or Alt and I go with my whites up. And obviously we're getting some burnt parts here, which we can check with the highlights later. And with the blacks, again, I go down and I want to see a little bit of blacks standing out, as you can see here, but that's about it. So let's have a look at the whites. So I can see that specifically down here in the sea. So we can use this local adjustment. We can create a mask, make a gradient down here, and just bring down the highlights on the water. So that way we don't affect the sky. So now we go back to the setting and we check the whites. And they still fair bit up. And that's why you went in a minus, because you were trying to get the reduce of them. And that now, let's see if we would push them even more. Brush. Did it help or not? White? Little bit. So maybe you bring the whites a little bit down, but that's about it. That's how I would leave it. But with the highlights, you want to go somewhere here to make sure that the sky is nice and fluffy and it kind of works all together. So that's where I would leave it. I think the white balance is nice. I think the rest of the edit is really nice. So all in all, I think this image is cool. I'm just not sure about the rock here. I wonder why you're getting this glow. Let's have a look if we have an actual... Is it this maybe? It's the local adjustment. So you see the local adjustment creating a glow around it. So what we can do actually really simply is we can apply it like this, and then we go click on this. Oh, it's a radial gradient, and we can say subtract and a brush. And what we're telling to the computer is that we want to remove everything what we're gonna brush on. So I brush around. Let's get even closer. Brush around. Basically, wherever I'm brushing, I am removing the glow, which will really help to make it a little bit more natural and realistic, but it will keep the glow on the actual rock. So let's have a look before, after. Let's have a look from far. So this is before, this is after. So I hope this was helpful. Similarly on this one, you could do exactly the same. Let's see, before and after. No, so that's the sky. Before, after. So similarly, you could do the same thing. Let's have a look again. And let's subtract with the brush. Let's zoom in. And again, wherever I brush, it basically removes the glow. That way we remove this kind of unnatural glow from around it, and we leave the brightness on the actual rock. So I like what you're doing. It just needs few more steps to it. So all in all, very cool. This one I love. All together with a little bit of a few touches. I think Alan, well done. Let's have a look on this one. There is no local adjustments here. So composition wise, I really like it. We're going to come back to that. I think this in together creates really nice frame for the river. So I think the idea works really well here. What I think I'm not 100% sure about how it's blurry here, and I think maybe it's a little bit too much of it there. I think if there would be a little bit less of the trees, I think it would be helpful. But together, it's a kind of fresh idea, and I quite like it. Now, when it comes to post-processing, the white balance is something what's really a little bit off here. So if we would go into color and see auto, what does it do? Nothing much. I wonder why you're getting such a harsh colors and so much brightness. So I wonder if we would have just exposure, maybe bring down the whites a little together with the highlights and just bring down the warmth in overall, push a little bit the pink, bring down the saturation and just push the vibrance. Maybe we're getting a little bit somewhere, but I would need to see the original image and see. Also, you're getting a little bit of glow around here, which I'm not sure what is actually coming from. And all in all, out of the two, I think this one is great. I think it's a great image with the great composition and great edit. On this one, I think it needs a little bit more work, and maybe you need to go back to the original raw file and see what you can do with it. Anyway, Alan, thank you very much for sending your photo. Make sure you send us more, and I'll hope to see them in the near future. And then Alan Sankster. Alan, thank you very much. Let's have a look at your images. We have two from you as well. So let's talk about this one right here and this one. So let's have a look at the technical part of the image. And it doesn't really have details here, which is really shame. It says Sunil River and waterfall. So let's have a look just from what we can see. Lots of green. So the white balance seems to be a little bit off with kind of really heavy pushed green out, which then leaked in the rest of the image. So that's something we will have to have a look at. Interesting sky, although I'm not 100% sure if it's the original one. Maybe it is, maybe it's just some kind of mountains which are hiding here behind. Who knows? So nice sky, a quite nice view with the people. I think the people add a sense of scale, so I think that works quite well. I think the frame created by the trees works well as well. It helps us to get the whole feel of the river. So I think technically, when it comes to framing and composition, it works quite well. Now the image is a bit smaller, so when I kind of zoom in, it gets really pixelated, as you can see. But it seems to be fine when it comes to sharpness, so that's quite good. The light was kind of pleasant. Obviously, it was still midday, but I don't see any harsh shadows, so well done on that. Now, composition, I already mentioned. The frame works really well. I think the people add a good scale to it, and I think that's fine. Now, let's have a look at this one. So again, people adding and helping us with the scale, which is great. I think technically the sharpness is there. The waterfall is quite nicely captured. I think a little longer exposure would make it even nicer, but and then you have to include tripod and so on. So that's maybe one for the future. The light is a little bit harsh here in some of the shadows where you're almost losing the details, but again, it's something to maybe work for a future. Now, when it comes to composition, I think the flow of the path here and the rocks create actually a really nice depth. So you kind of feel like you can see how the kind of valley or the rock goes towards the waterfall works. Again, I think the people adding sense of scale works as well. So all in all, composition-wise, I quite like it. So well done here. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I think you need to keep an eye on both image on the white balance. So let's have a look at the color and let's see. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I think on both of them, you need to, first of all, look at the white balance. So let's jump into the color here and let's go into white balance and let's turn it to auto. And you can see immediately how it improves and make it so much more natural. And the reason is that quite often when a camera captures an image where there is lots of one dominant color, and that often happens with greens and blues, it then starts to apply the tint of that color in the rest of the image. So in this example, to take this, it starts to apply the green into the water and on the rocks and onto people and so on. And so the whole image turns to a little bit of a green tint. So when I go then to the white balance and click on auto, you can see how immediately Lightroom recognizes that, and it pushes the tint from green into the purple, which removes the green from the tint. It leaves the green inside of the leaves, which is perfectly fine, and in the foliage, which look natural, but it removes the green from the rest of the image. So let me show you before and after. Let's just look at the water itself right here, before and after. So I think that helps greatly. Obviously, we could push a little bit the exposure, and I would definitely open up the shadow a little bit more to be able to see in some of these parts. And now just close it with something like a vignette. So then something like this, maybe push a little bit the contrast, and suddenly you're getting a really cool image. Now on this one, I know the kind of length is really important, but what I would do, I would probably cut it to something like 16 or 9, maybe not that much, but maybe something like this, and get a really nice view of the image with a very panoramic feel. So that's about that. On this one, similarly, starting point, definitely your white balance. Let's see if we go into the auto. You see how it, again, really pushes the tint and pushes the temperature. Maybe the temperature, we don't need to push that much. What I would also do in this case, when you have really a lot of this green, I would go into the color mixer, look at the saturation, and maybe bring the green down a little to something like that. And then in a hue, I would just double check and maybe make the green a little bit more natural into something like this. You can also look at the yellows and kind of push them there as well, and you would get something like this. Push the purple even more, and maybe remove some of the saturation and just push the vibrance. Now similarly, we can do a little vignette here, and maybe a little radial gradient here, and push the view even more. And can do another linear gradient and close the picture from here, just to kind of bring the attention towards the front. So Alan, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It was cool to work with them. I think you have a good eye for composition, but post-processing needs a little bit of polishing. Other than that, thank you so much. Send us more pictures in the future, and take care. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Bill. Bill, we have 2 images from you. So let's jump into them. Starting with this trains and the rail, well done. So I always like the rails because I think they create really nice leading lines, really nice flow into the image, and quite often they work really, really well. Now looking at this one, beautiful sunset over the pond or kind of lake here. So quite nice idea as well. So let's jump into the reviewing. Starting with this one, you're using Canon PowerShot, ISO 100, f4. 0.01 1250th of a second. So technically the image is a little bit slow, but I think that's the look you were going for. So it makes it more dreamy, nothing wrong about that. I quite like the little bit of the sharpness in the middle of the image, which helps with the overall feel. I think maybe the framing, your foreground here, I think is a little bit extra, but we can talk about it a little later. The sunset is quite nice with a lots of texture in it. I think the overall image is a little bit dark, so I would have gone for a little bit more exposure there. But all in all, I think technically it's good, and the camera settings were fine. Now talking about this image, same camera, ISO 100, f9, 1/400th of the second. And now when it comes to camera setting, it's all good. 100 is always the kind of golden goal. F9 is good as well, keeping sharpness all the way through. And then 1/400th of a second is good to make sure that everything works. Now, kind of looking at the image closer, you can really see this part of the image. I don't know if it was added in post-processing or what, but you can really see the difference between the 2 different parts of the image. So I think that's visible fair bit. So that's something to kind of keep an eye, because it kind of overtakes everything else. Again, it's kind of similar dreamy edit, which is really nice. I have nothing wrong with it. There is kind of slight sharpness on these elements and all the way through, so that works quite well. It's just these 2 parts, I think they would need a little bit of blending. And if it's a Photoshop, you can use a mask and then kind of brush with little opacity and brush the kind of step between 2 of them away from each other, or just see what you could do there. Now, composition-wise, I think anytime you're standing on the rails and you're using the rails like this, you really want to be in the center of them. You really want to create balanced, centered composition when the rails are in the middle, really dividing the composition on two equal parts and leading you away. Now, you're slightly off, which also works, but I think if you are in the middle, it creates even more powerful composition there. Other than that, I think the sky has a nice texture. I think it's nicely divided within a third. I think some of these elements actually helps with the depth of field, with the depth of the image, and they give us a sense of the scale of the scene. So all in all, well done on a composition here. Now on this one, I think this part is a little bit unnecessary. I know that we talk about foreground all the time, but I think either you have a full foreground with kind of major element, or you just don't put it there. So in your case on this one, I would definitely crop it much tighter, maybe sticking with the 16 or 9 and doing something like this. And you can use the water as a foreground, then you have these kind of parts as a middle ground, and the sky as a background. And I think together it's a little bit more powerful, and I think it works a little bit better. So this is what I would do. When you have a sun like this, it's always good to keep him in a center, just like you have, and that's about it. Now, post-processing, on this one, nothing. I think it's a little bit dark. I think it's a little bit too dark, so maybe a touch of exposure would help here and open some of the shadows a little as well, and that's about it. On this one, when it comes to post-processing, before anything else, I would have a look at why you're getting this kind of divider here. If it's a sky replacement or what's the reason, it needs to be attached there. Also be careful with pushing this dreamy look too much to the point when people start to think that it's soft and unsharp. That's just my thing. Other than that, Bill, I think well done, great captures, and make sure you send us more in the future. We would love to see them again. Okay, let's jump into the next photographer. We have a Bruse Rob here. Bruse, we have two images from you, so let's have a look at them. Starting with this one, a really nice landscape capture right here with the valley going all the way through and the lovely mountains at the back. And then looking at this one, kind of guy riding a donkey, or boy riding a donkey through the city with some kind of trucks and so on. So let's have a look at it. Starting with this one, let's see if we have any details about the camera. And we do. So obviously using Sony A7 Mark II, I believe, ISO 100, f7, 100 of a second. So the camera setting is spot on. This is exactly what we're looking for, and it's very cool. Now, looking at the image, there is a nice sharpness all the way through, with a little bit of the softness in the immediate foreground, which is fine. I mean, when you have a kind of closer elements to the camera, it's always good to go for something a little bit higher, like f9 or f11, and staying in this zone. However, still, that can be easily cropped, and the most important is that there is, after that, kind of sharpness pretty much all the way through. So that's about good. The light is quite pleasant, even though it's a kind of midday capture, or it seems that way anyway, with the daylight. And that's about it. That's fine. I mean, there is a little bit of some kind of artifacts here, which I'm not sure what they created by. You're also getting a little bit of kind of contrast within the clouds, but all in all, I think it's a cool capture. Now, talking about this one, Nikon D80, ISO 200, f10, 1/200 of a second. So ISO 200, yeah, you wanna keep your camera steady and making sure that there is no blur when it comes to the moving subject. So the 1/200 of a second is cool. f10, I think this is a case where I would have gone for smaller f-stop, which would help you to be able to lower the ISO down, and also it would blur some of the background. I think specifically when you're capturing something like this, which is very interesting, you maybe want to create a little bit more depth of the field. All in all, I think the sharpness all the way through is not necessarily here and doesn't necessarily help. So I think it would quite help if you would have lowered the f-stop for the next time. Obviously, it's sharp, it's harsh daylight, so lots of kind of harsh shadows here, which is a little bit of a shame, but I understand with picture like this, you can't really choose the time of the day. So together, well done. Now, talking about composition, I think one thing I would start here is the geometry, making sure that everything is straight, specifically when it comes to capture like this. So it's really simple as going to geometry and switching it to auto. I would also crop it a little bit tighter to the actual guy. So maybe something like this and something like this. I don't know how important is the guy on the top of the track. You could probably go even as close as this and really end up with something like this. But then once you crop, you start to see that the boy, especially around the head, around the body, is a little bit too soft. You could again maybe go with something like this and maybe give him a little bit of a space. So to do something like this, really depends how you want to position him. It's just when you leave it like this, you're not really sending necessarily clear message on to say what is the main subject here and what is it you're trying to kind of showcase on this image. So let's just reset this. This is where we were. As I say, I think what would really help this image would be a little bit of a depth and a little bit blur at the background. So I would more focus on the main subject and less on the other items. Now on this one, when it comes to composition, I think again, a little different crop would help. Just gonna crop half of the palm away and some of the blurry parts. So we would do that. So maybe just something like this. I would even crop some of the road down there away and too much, and just leave it like this. Let's see if we would even crop this away, something like this. And I think this is much more nicer. It kind of takes away the half parts and things which are just distracting, and this way it's keeping a really nice view. I think this view is really cool. The palm tree helps with the depth, and so does the hill here and hill here. The foreground, middle ground, and background I think works really well here. And all in all, Bruse, this one is a lovely one. Now, talking about post-processing on this one, I would probably turn it to black and white, to be honest, because the light isn't really that interesting. If not, then you can push the contrast a little bit, add the effect, vignette, and really kind of bring the focus on the boy itself. Now, on this one, double check your white balance because it seems really green, not as yellow, definitely, but a little bit of pink, I think, helps to make it a little bit more natural. That's the first thing I would do. I would definitely do a little bit of vignette to close the image and then do some local adjustments with the type of linear gradient, maybe something like this, and bring down the exposure up there. And then you can add a little bit of brightness to certain parts of the image. So like this, maybe here, here. So it adds a little bit of a contrast to certain parts of the image and makes it even a little bit more interesting. Bruse, all in all, love this one. This one needs a little bit of work. I know what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure if it works completely. But still, thank you very much for sharing your photos with you. It was lovely to see them, lovely to review them. If you have more images, make sure you send them for the next week's episode. Now, moving on to the next photographer, we have a Caroline. Caroline, we have 2 images from you. Now, I reviewed this one already in the group, but thank you very much for sending it again. It's stunning. I think it's one of my most favorite images from you. I think everything is here. Beautiful light, beautiful editing, beautiful composition. All in all, this one put together, I think works really well. One thing when I was kind of looking at it later, I was just thinking I would crop this top part a little bit more away, maybe to something like this, just because I feel there's a bit too much of it up there. Like I was telling you in the actual review there, I would open the shadows even a little bit more, just to get a little bit more details in these parts of the image. Now you could highlight the actual center a little bit like this, with a little bit of exposure. I think that would help as well. But other than that, as I told you in the review on the Facebook page, I think this picture works perfectly. Technically, I think it's very well done. The silhouette, I think, works really well here. The light is awesome. The composition with the leading lines, with the depth of field created with the trees. All in all, I think it works really well, Caroline. I'm really happy and proud of this capture from you. Now, moving on this one, that is a cool picture as well. I really like the kind of fog or dust going through the trees and then the sun shining through. I think it's creating a really epic, powerful scene here. Now the sun has a really nice starburst around it. It's almost like, when we're capturing the sun, there are two ways to do it. One with the kind of big glow around it, with nice gradient through the different colors of the sun. And the second one is to have the sun really defined with a clear circle around it. And it seems a little bit like you were kind of stuck between the two worlds. It still works, but it would have been even touch nicer if you would have a really defined circle. But since we haven't reviewed this picture, let's quickly have a look at it. Let's see if we have any technical details, and we do. So Canon 5D Mark IV is what you're using. The settings were ISO 100, f22, 1/160th of a second. Now, ISO 100, so spot on. We have avoided any unnecessary noise, which is great. f22, again, going really high. Just be careful. Just like we already mentioned with the other photographers. Usually, when we go and shoot a landscape, we like to use the golden area when it comes to your lens, which is the f-stop between 7.1 and usually about f11, f16. So now obviously the higher you push the number, the more things in a focus. But once you go above f16, and this depends really on each of the lens, once you push it up, and that can be f20, it can be f16 for some, f22, f whatever. Once you get over a certain limit, it starts to bring actually more blur and less sharpness, and it brings a softness. And it's a little bit like with your ISOs and shutter speed. Once you push it over a certain limit, it doesn't really help anymore. It also creates kind of weird artifacts on the image. So it's just something to kind of think of and really try with your lens and see what works for you there. 1/160th of a second is fine. It depends on what the scene was requiring. I would more kind of think about the f22 and make sure that you're getting as much sharpness as you can. Now on this image is not as that visible, but double check your raw file and see how you're doing. I think there's lots of yellows, even in the grass area, which can be a little bit overwhelming. So for the framing, I would maybe cut a little bit of the grass away. But I think what helps and really save it here is the actual texture on the grass. I think it helps to kind of divide the element and makes it a little bit more interesting and kind of usable from the point of view of the viewer. Now, composition wise, I think it's great. I know you kind of like to use the squares from time to time. Again, as I say, I would maybe crop a little bit of this away just to get maybe something like this. And even maybe a little bit of the top. And this is where I would take it. Because then you get this as a foreground element, but it's not overwhelming. Your full focus is on the trees, on the beautiful fog, on the light going through, and the sun. And then you have the sky, which is just full of golden colors, and it just looks all pretty and beautiful. So Caroline, all in all, that's about where I would leave it. I think the post-processing is cool on it. I love this kind of silhouette / really warm photo. Both of them are great. This one I already told you. Well done. Well done on your captures. Take care and send us more pictures in the near future. Now we're going to Dennis now. Dennis, we have 2 images from you to look at. So let's quickly kind of jump in. Now looking at this one, it seems to be really blurry. Let me see if I maybe not zoom right. Let's see the details of the picture. Right here. And it's really small, Dennis. So this one we're not going to review, because if I would have to tell, look, when I zoom in like this, it's just pixels. Obviously, it's a lovely idea, but if you want me to review it, you have to make sure that you send it in a little bit bigger format than 640 on 360. Now on this one, this is a proper size, 4000 on 3000 pixels, 655 size, megabyte size. So let's talk about this one right here. So obviously there is no details about the camera or camera settings. However, from what I can see, the sharpness is pretty decent. Again, with kind of, maybe the ISO was really high, and that's why you're getting this kind of very pixelated effect on specifically the foreground of the picture. As you can see, it's kind of, yeah, you're just getting this. Like when you look at it like this, it's not that visible. The moment you just zoom in a little bit, it starts to really stand out. And then when you zoom in even further, that's when you start to get this kind of really pixelated, almost like a watercolor effect. Now, generally for me, this happens when I have a really high ISO, and then I try to fix it. So each camera and each gear has a certain point when once you go over it, it starts to create this effect. Now, when I used to have my Nikon, I think it was 3500, the kind of limit was somewhere around ISO 600, and after that I couldn't shoot any further. Now I have a Sony a7R4 and I can go as far as 2500, and after that it starts to create something like this. So you really need to test it on your camera. My point is that once you get over this threshold, you can't fix it even in a post-processing, because these pixels are basically gone and lost. So that's just something to think of. The light and the texture in the sky is beautiful and gorgeous, so it's a great time of the day. What I would more focus on is the noise and the sharpness in the foreground. Now, when it comes to composition, obviously the field creates quite nice foreground, and but again, I would crop it a little bit differently since we have this issue here, and I would focus much more on the actual sky. So I would maybe create something like this, make it a little bit turn, and this is where I would kind of take it. Moving on to the post-processing, I would definitely kind of make this almost looks like a silhouette. Maybe not that much, but I would definitely make it darker. So I would use for that like a local adjustment, masking tool, linear gradient, and just paint it right here, and then bring the exposure nice and down and create almost something like this. You can make it a little bit warmer if you want. And this is where I would start from. You can create another linear gradient on the top and actually close the image a little bit more, adding a little bit more blue into the sky. This is where I would take it, and then create another mask and use the radial gradient at this part of the photo, and just add extra warmth tint there. Here, working. And what sometimes helps on these kind of parts of the image is to bring down the clarity a little bit. So maybe not that much, maybe something like this, but I think like this, getting that's where I would leave it. So let me see before, after. I think by darkening the foreground, you're removing the kind of feel of the noise and of the pixels there, and you then bring in the focus on the sky, which I think in this case is the main element anyway, and I think it works really, really good. So all in all, I think it's a great capture and great timing for the sky with lots of details, so well done there. However, something to do with your camera, and for next time, try to send your pictures with the camera details so I can tell you more and I can explain more about what we could do differently. Now, moving on the next photographer, we have a Dr. Moshe. Dr. Moshe, we have 2 pictures from you this week again. So let's jump into it. Starting with this one is the kind of town view with the light coming from there and with a little gate here. And then we have this one with the building, nice sun, and the boat kind of helping us with the composition and with a little bit of depth. Now let's talk about it. Starting with this one, let's have a look at the information. What's your eye? Probably 1800. It's a shame that I can't see it a little bit closer. However, you can see a fair bit of the noise. That's the first thing. When you zoom in, you can really see it. You can also see some color difference. So again, I just talk about it so you can listen to the previous review. But basically, your ISO was 18,000. Well, that's why you're getting all the different colors. And basically, once you hit a certain point on your camera with the ISO, it starts to create a softness. It starts to introduce wrong color tints, and it's really difficult then to change it and use it in any photo editing application, including a Lightroom. So that's something to think of. Now, your f4.5, so pretty much as low as you could on your lens there, and 1/100th of a second. Now, obviously, there could be a way how you could work with this a little bit. However, first thing I would start with is to make sure that I have a tripod next time and bring the ISO as low as possible. and see how I would take it from there. That's when it comes to technical point. Now, talking about this one, ISO 450, f5, 1/640th of a second. Now, I think if you want to shoot at this time of the day, you need to get a tripod because the main thing you need to remove, and I think this is after I've seen fair few of your pictures already, the main thing you need to remove is the high ISO. That will save so much work for you, and it will improve the pictures immediately, and it's the biggest thing which will make the biggest difference. So once you get a tripod, you bring your ISO close to 100 or 200 depending on the light. Then you can set up your f-stop, which, for example, this scene would be much better to have something like f7, f8 to get the sharpness all the way through and to get the most out of your lens. And then depending on what's required, you could push the shutter speed to whatever the camera tells you for this scene. For example, it could be like a longer exposure, half a second, or see what would need to be done. So that would be my suggestion for there. Again, because of the higher ISO, you can see a fair bit of a noise in the sky and in the darker areas. The sharpness is quite good, so no problem with that. And the texture in the sky is nice as well. So just the ISO and the tripod would be my initial thought on this one. Now, talking about composition, this works quite well. Now you're getting a little bit of halo here, but the sun kind of peeking behind the building works. The foreground with these bushes and the middle ground with the building works quite well too. The sky is nice. I think the boat again helps with the depth. And all in all, I think it's quite good capture when it comes to composition. Now, on this one, the composition is interesting. I understand what you're trying to do. Obviously, the frame-in-frame view, the flow works quite well here. But I think on this one, it's more the technical part, which you would need to focus on. Moving on the post-processing, on this one, you could, for example, turn it to black and white and push the contrast. I think I would, here in effects, I would bring down the vignette. So that way you're removing the noise from all these parts and you remove the kind of colors from here. I would bring down the clarity, which will help us to bring glow from here. And then in a local adjustment, you can use the radial gradient and actually paint over this part. Something like this here, and then I would invert it and actually do something like this, and suddenly you're getting something really interesting, even with the work you managed there. And from there I would take it and see, you know, maybe some local adjustments, see the blacks and whites, and see bring the highlights a little bit and just check the whites with good here, and then bring the darks a bit and get something like this. Then you could crop it a little bit more, something like this, to make it a little bit more balanced, and suddenly you have something interesting. Now on this one, not much more I would do, to be honest. I think the crop is good. Maybe position the sun in the kind of third, which is always a good idea, so you could get something like this. But other than that, I think it's cool. I think it's well done. The white balance, let's just double check it. Not that. But maybe like this. I just wonder why you're getting this glow around the building. That would be probably one thing I would be looking for. Other than that, Dr. Moshe, thank you very much for joining us again. Thank you for sending us your pictures. It's a pleasure as always, and I am looking forward to see more of them in a near future. Okay, moving on the next photographer, we have Enzo here with the two images. So Enzo, let's jump into it. Starting with this one right here. Again, just as a reminder for everyone, try to stay away from using watermarks, signatures, and any frames to your images. I mean, lots of my colleagues who do review basically don't review the images once the signatures are there, simply because it takes away the attention from the actual image. And what you really want from person who review your photos is to focus on the image themselves rather than focusing on the font or the color and so on. So that's just for the future. But anyway, talking about this one, let's have a look at the technical part of your image. We have a Sony 7 Mark IV, your lens 24-105 f4, and so from your settings, ISO 100, f9 1/640th of a second. So the setting is perfect. Again, I'm kind of using this kind of soft foreground element. I think works very well for this kind of framing. So that's good. There is a sharpness all the way through. I think the person there actually helps for the feel of scale. So that's a good one as well. The detail in the clouds like this are quite nice as well. And all in all, technically, it's an interesting light. I think it's touch harsh with some really dark areas. So that's probably technically the only thing I would think of and see if you could do differently for the future. But obviously, I'm well aware that we all can't be everywhere at the best times. It's just something to maybe think of for the future. Where on this one, I think the time of the day is perfect. The lovely glow works really well here. The gold and blue combination is always good. The lamppost with the birds, where those two being kind of soft and in movement, and this one being sharp, I think works really well as well. So putting it together, this is technically very well done. Again, looking at the kind of settings, ISO 200, f5, 1/125th of a second. So ISO 200 is fine. Obviously with this camera, probably pretty much minimal noise you're getting, which is really cool. F5 helps us to kind of create a really nice depth of field. 1/125th of a second. Probably keeps some birds which are still sharp, and the one which are in move a little bit blurry, which in combination I think works quite well on this image. So all in all, well done. Technically very cool. Love the lamp. Just very good feel of it. Now talking about composition on this one, I think it's really nice. I mean, it's very simple composition and very simple message here. It's all about the lamppost and about the birds. There isn't like a huge focus on some kind of foreground or depth of field. Depth of field here is really kind of created by the birds and a little bit of softness at the background. But I think the focus goes pretty much on the birds standing and the lamppost. So very cool here. Nothing to add. On this one, I think what you're really trying to do, I think works very well. This is maybe a little bit too dominant for me. I think it kind of really take huge part of the image, so that's just one thing. Other than that, as I said already, I think the person helps to understand the scale of the image. This obviously definitely creates kind of very strong foreground, including this. To be honest, if I would have to choose, I would prefer this green part not to be there, but it still creates quite nice frames, so it's just a 50-50. I think the image is tilting a little bit, so I would probably just double check that everything is straight there. Other than that, composition wise, I think it's quite cool. So the scale is there, the depth is there, and the frame as well. I think it works. And so on post-processing, this one, let's just double check your white balance, and maybe not that much, but a little bit of a yellow or warmth would help here, I think. And that's about it, I think you could open up the shadows just a little bit more to get a little bit more details back in these kind of harsh shadow areas. But other than that, I would leave it. On this one, I think it's very natural. I really like the overall feel of it, and I would totally leave it. I think it just works very, very well here. So all in all, Enzo, thank you very much for sending your images. Few hits and hints, just maybe what to do a little bit differently for the future, but definitely keep shooting and send us more images in the future if you have any. And looking at the next photographer, we have a Guido. Guido was our photographer of the week in the last week's episode, and this week we're looking at his landscape photos. So let's jump into it, starting with this one, a really nice sunset with a lovely reflection here. Well done there. And with this one, kind of hiding the sign behind the subject, I think which always works. A little bit of a white balance, maybe adjustment needed, and a little bit of a sensor dust visible on the image is again something what we're gonna touch up in later on in the review, but still quite nice idea and always nice effect when you hide the sun behind the subject. Now let's have a look at the technical details. So this one was shot with the Nikon Z6, ISO 100, f11, 1/400th of a second. That is a spot on setting, so definitely good starting point right here. With the f11, just making sure that everything is in nice and focus. 1/400 of a second helps us to bring some of the texture in the sky and keeps the glow really nice like this. Everything is sharp all the way through. Now you're getting kind of strange color artifacts, specifically in this part of the image. You're also getting a little bit of from what is visible, a little bit of chromatic aberration. So just something to kind of look at. Also, the some of the sensor dust is really visible. It's easy to remove. There is a video in the description on how you can do it in a Lightroom, but once we here, there is a little healing brush here. You can visualize the spots, make them kind of stand out. And as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can really just make the brush a little bigger. And then it's a simple clicks. Again, here, here, here. And once that's done, that helps incredibly. So that's where we are, and that's it. Now, talking about this one and technical part, moving into this. This was a different camera, Nikon D500, ISO 160, so perfect. F11, 1/800 of a second. So again, the setting is spot on. Well done there. You're getting a really nice sun as well with nice defined circle. Obviously, the reflection had a little bit of wrinkles, but all in all, I think it's very, very cool. So technically, very nicely done. The kind of silhouette-like effect works here as well, specifically with the bird. So well done there. Now, talking about composition, I really like the reflection. You get a little bit of the high frequency foreground here, which sometimes makes the image feel a little bit busier than it needs. But I don't think it's a big deal here, and it would be a headache to remove in post-processing, so I would leave it. What I would do more, I would probably bring this down a little bit, just to keep the same amount of space above and below, which makes it just a little bit more balance in overall the whole composition. So maybe shift this little bit and keep it something like this, which I think helps a little bit together. Now, other than that, I would leave it. Now, I'm not 100% sure if these bushes needs to be here. You could obviously try to crop them away and see what it would do. It's a different image, but again, something to kind of think of for the future. Now, when it comes to this one and the post-processing, first, I would start by geometry, just double checking that everything is straight by using the auto, which I think helped. I think the leading lines here and here creates really nice flow, but together it's a little bit unbalanced because obviously the sky, the sun hiding behind this is the kind of main subject. So you're almost wondering if really the crop shouldn't be more something like this. And I think that would create a little bit more balance and a more kind of suitable composition for me. And this is where I would kind of leave it. Again, I think the depth of field created with these kind of different grasses works real. The flow is really nice, and just together, I think if you would crop it or frame it like this, I think it would really help. Now, talking about post-processing, let's just reset this. The contrast between the blue and the yellow, I think, works quite nicely. There is a nice warmth. Again, I would double check on the original file for the chromatic aberration and for these parts. Now, obviously, some of these parts would be removed if you would apply a little bit of the vignette here. So that's always a little bit helpful. I would actually, in overall, bring a little bit the saturation down because I think it kind of is almost on the edge of being unnatural. And maybe this is where I would leave it. Now, on this one, I wouldn't do anything. I think it's really well done, very kind of dramatic, but a natural feel with the lovely capture of the sun setting with the silhouette behind, spot on. So Guido, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It's always a pleasure to see them. Congratulations one more time for your achievement last week, and take care. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a John Lister. John, we have had 2 images from you this week. And this one is very cool. Obviously, a combination with some brushing I've seen before. So well done there. I think that's very cool. And on this one, a lovely sky, very nice marina with lovely warm light. So let's talk about your pictures. Let's have a look at the capturing details. This one, Nikon D90, ISO 200, f5, 1/100 of a second. So from the setting wise, ISO 200 is fine. I understand that. F5, I'm not sure. You could have gone a little bit higher maybe. just to kind of make sure that everything is sharp. It seems that everything is sharp anyway, but it's just kind of to get the most out of your lens. The reflection is really nice as well. The texture in the sky works. So all in all, I would just look at the ISO. Keeping it around 100 is always the goal. And for this scene, I would be probably going more for like f8, f9, but then questioning if you had a tripod on also. Together as a compilation, I think it works. You're getting a little bit of a vignette in corners, which I wonder if you could have maybe fixed in, the camera settings, but all in all, it's very cool. Now talking about this one, Nikon Z6, ISO 100, f8, 1/125th of a second. I think you're getting a little bit of a glow around the tree, which is not a big deal. But other than that, the colors are really nice. The reflection is actually quite nice. And all in all, together, put it together, I think it's quite nice result. I like what you've done with the brushes. Yeah, that's where I would leave it. I think the setting is spot on. And what you could do next time is maybe even slower the shutter speed a little bit more. Since you have this kind of serene atmosphere, you would maybe benefit from having the water even more calmer than it is, and take it from there, John. Now, talking about composition, obviously the person and this one, if there is actually somebody, help with the depth. Obviously the birds also help with movement and depth again. The tree also help with the feeling of your kind of foreground, middle ground, background. I think the cropping is quite nice. The reflection, because of the water, isn't perfect, but it's there a little. And I think that helps as well. Now, talking about this one, I would just make sure that it's straight. So I would do that in geometry and use so something like this. And that's about it. I mean, it's a little bit busy, but that's obviously because of all the different boats. I like how the kind of group of the boats is centered. I think that works quite well and actually helps. I'm quite happy that there is not overly crazy amount of clouds in the sky, because it makes it a little bit simpler in compare with the boats. So I think that helps. And overall, I think it's cool. Obviously, there is a depth here, there's a flow, and the scale with the people. So putting it together as a composition is very well done. Now, post-processing, I really like it. There is maybe you can add a touch of a vignette. Other than that, it's great. The white balance is lovely. The shadows are open just how they should be. The sky is nice and soft. All in all, only thing I would be looking for is this kind of lens vignette, and see how I could remove it. Now, talking about this one, it always helps when you use a brush like this to put it on a layer and add to it just a touch of blur. Maybe even just one of the Gaussian blur or something like that, because it makes it a little bit more natural and believable. Where here it's so clearly defined that it's a little bit visible to start with. So what I would do, I would apply the brush and see what works for you. You will have to kind of test it and see, but maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Gaussian blur or any other blur, just to make it a little bit more soft and believable. That's about it. Something more similar maybe to the person here. Other than that, I think the post-processing is spot on. Try to see how to maybe be able to remove the glow. You can use the different brushes in Photoshop to kind of brush it off. But in overall, John, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see that you're using the tools. Thank you for sending your pictures over. Make sure you send us more in the near future. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Ketan. Ketan, we have one photo from you, and it's quite nice. I mean, a good job here. Dramatic sky, lots of birds. The guy kind of going over the river with a nice light hitting him as well. Let's have a look at the details if we have any. Sadly, we don't have details from the actual capture, so that's a little bit of a shame. But all in all, obviously there is a little bit of blur in the foreground, but nice sharpness on the person and the middle ground. A lovely dramatic sky with a little bit of a glow on the horizon. So I'm not 100% sure if this was the sky which was there earlier. However, still nicely done together. Again, with the birds, I think it works very, very well. So technically, I think this is quite nicely done. The composition is brilliant. Obviously, clear subject. The blur really help with the depth. The movement is there. So all in all, Ketan, this is very well done. I don't know, obviously because it's very cinematic, I would have maybe go 16 or 9 and actually remove some of the birds and maybe go even for something like this, creating a really kind of powerful scene here, maybe even like this, which I think is even more powerful, but together as a composition, it's really well done. Now, post-processing, keeping an eye on the color leak on the person, just kind of making sure that it's, I think it's on the edge. I think it works, but you just need to make sure. And then this little slight glow on the horizon, which normal person wouldn't notice, but I think photographer would be looking at it and thinking, is it because of a sky replacement? And then you start to really dig into the overall feel of the image. Shouldn't similar color tones be in the water and so on? So just something to think of. Ketan, thank you very much for sending us your photo. Take care and send us more in the future. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Luciano. Luciano, again, like last week, as I told you, really preferably no frames, no signatures, and no watermarks. So just to kind of be clear, I don't really want to repeat it every week. I will review the picture this week, but for next week, please send us the picture without it. Otherwise, I will not review them. So let's just remove the frame and the signature so we can focus on the actual image. Let's do it here and here. And there we are. So talking about the picture, black and white. This is kind of similar scene you sent us last week already. Is the tower in the middle of a lake probably, or maybe some kind of like a field. From a technical point of view, let's see if we have a details, and we don't. There is a really nice kind of set of details. Sharpness is there as well. The light is a little bit harsh, specifically here, and also in this mountain. I think it's going on a kind of really dark side, which could be also because of the transition into the JPEG. Let's see if we can open it a little bit more. So I think this is something what I would be looking for. Even though you use the dark enclosed shadows, I think it's always good when you can see at least a little bit of the details from there. So that would be one thing I would do. There is a little bit of noise in the sky visible, which could be also added grain. So I'm not sure what you were trying to do there. And this is why it's quite cool when you can get the camera details. So then I can provide even more feedback. Now, when it comes to composition, I think it works quite well. Having the tower kind of off-centered and off the rule of thirds, I think it works quite nicely. Obviously, the tower adds nice depth to the image. I think the texture also help, again, to make it a little bit more kind of believable. And that's about it. I think the background works nicely too. The sky has a lots of nice texture in it. So all in all, well done. Now, talking about post-processing, again, I think this part is way too black. And I think the sky also going on the edge of being a little bit black. I mean, if you would print this, these parts would be completely dark and you would see that it wouldn't look great. But I think everything else is done quite nicely. So I know you're going for this kind of really kind of rough black and white photos, but keep an eye on it and making sure that the shadows, there is a really kind of slight balance between completely closing them and making things dark and having them darker still with details showing off. So that would be for the future. Luciano, thank you very much. Take care and send us more photos soon. Now, Marta, we have two pictures from you. Marta was our photographer of the week, I believe, and also winner of our Winter Wonderland competition. So two recognitions for one photographer. We love her foliage photos and she keeps pushing herself forward. So it's always great to see your images, Marta. Looking at the two images you send us, I love this one. And especially the bouquet at the back is stunning. So the light is beautiful. And then on this one, it's really a lot about the sun, isn't it, this time, with the kind of heavy light leak and the kind of bouquets and, the kind of burns. I think it's really powerful. So let's have a look at the camera settings on this one. Nikon D5600. And then this one is Nikon D5200. So 2 different cameras. On this one, ISO 400, f13, 1/320th of a second. So let's have a look if much of a noise, a little bit of the color kind of leaked through on some parts. There is a little bit of some of the chromatic aberration kind of showing as well, which is completely normal when you're shooting directly to the sun like this. So that's something to look at. To be honest, the noise isn't as visible with that high ISO, so well done there. F13, just making sure everything is sharp, I guess. Again, keep an eye on, depending on the lens, sometimes when you go high, and I mean high, usually above f16, you start to reintroduce the softness into the image. So lots of people think when they push the f-stop as high as possible, they get really sharpness all the way through. But to be honest, there is a certain point, and every lens has the point somewhere else. But there is a certain point when you hit it, it almost like a reverse effect. You get to f13, f16, and everything is sharp all the way through. And then you hit the f20, and not just certain parts, but the whole image start to look softer again. So that's just something to look at. Also, there are kind of some kind of color differences. Like here, you're getting some kind of blues peeking behind. And I also seen it here. So just, again, something to keep an eye on. So technically, that's where we are. On this one, oh, I love this one. The level of details on the plant is brilliant. So ISO 320, f9, 1/320th of a second, and 240 millimeters. Hence why you can have an f9 and still have this beautiful bokeh at the back. Lovely capture. Now, not the greatest contrast between the foreground and the background, obviously, but sometimes that's how it is. I think still it works quite well. Lots of details and a little bit of a kind of depth of field created with some sharpness in the foreground and some not so sharpness at some parts of the plants, but all in all together, just very cool capture. When let's stay with this image. When we talk about composition, it's interesting. Obviously, these kind of plants, I think what I'm missing here more is the contrast between the foreground and the background. And in this case, I think the contrast would have to be created with the color. But that's just about it. It's the subject is clearly here. The message is clear. And it's just well done. Now, talking about composition on this one, I love the frame and frame. I think that works very well. Let's just have a quick look at the cropping. I would probably just push it a little bit more, making sure that I have the sun in the center. So I would do something like this, and that's where I would leave it. Other than that, I think it works. Again, easily recognizable, straightforward subject. Well done here, Marta. Thank you very much. And let's move on the post-processing. On post-processing, on this one, you can just really play around with some local adjustments. Adding vignette is always a good idea to kind of bring the attention towards something. So this would help. You could brush in a little bit of the brightness to certain parts. I really wouldn't worry that much about this one because it just works. So something like this, and then bringing it down a little, and I would leave it. On this one, definitely vignette, darkening the thing even more, and I would leave it there, take it like this. Very cool. Marta, thank you so much sending us your photos. Take care, enjoy the Luminar Neo. I hope you're gonna have lots of fun with it, and send us more pictures in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Mike Bruse. Mike, we have 2 images from you, black and white and color with some snow. So talking about this one, let's have a look at the camera details. No camera details. That's a shame. And on this one, neither. So no camera details. So we can't really say what we were doing exactly. Let's have a look. So there is a sharpness in the image, pretty much all the way as I. Now looking at the back, there's some kind of really strange artifacts. There's like a really sharp difference between the C here and the C here, and it kind of repeats a little bit here and then it disappears. So just something to look at. Also, there is strange artifact around here, as you can see, really kind of sharp details. So something to keep an eye on. The sky is nice. It has a nice details in them and lovely clouds. So it's kind of more dramatic view. Of course, looking at the light and some of the shadows, they seems to be really harsh. So I'm assuming the sun was coming from this part. So just something like a few things to kind of look at later on. Now, talking about this one, it's a little bit soft. So you're getting the snow and then you're getting the warm background, which is cool. But obviously the sharpness isn't really all the way there when you zoom in. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. I like the capture of the snow. I think that works really cool. Also, there is a texture in the sky. So technically, I would be focusing on the sharpness on this one next time. And now, composition-wise, I'm assuming the main message and the main subject is the boat. But then I would have probably moved a little bit more towards the side to show more of it. I also wouldn't worry so much about the other elements. I think this takes a little bit of attention away, and so does this. So I would have probably moved more there, but leaving it like this, I would, looking at it like this from what you have, it's fine. It's maybe some parts here I would kind of crop away to maybe get something like this and take it from here. So this is where maybe it's something to kind of look at, Mike. Talking about composition on this one, the composition is quite nice. It creates nice depth. It's nice cropping, nice flow into the image. But I think on this one, I would just double check the post-processing again and see why you're getting these different parts and see how you could get reduce of them. So in post-processing, we don't need to say or talk too much about it. As I mentioned, this is something I would look at. Why is it showing like this? Also, why there is such a big difference between the different parts of the water. And I would see if I can maybe open the shadows a little bit to get reduce of some of the really harsh shadows there, but you would have to do it more locally. So maybe using something like brush and bringing the shadows up, painting areas. So that's about it. On this one, sharpness is the main subject I would be looking at. I would probably push the contrast and try to make it stand out a little bit more. So you can always do that by contrast. See how you are with the whites and blacks. You can also double check your white balance. Let's see what it gives us, or with the picker, something like this. And you could also in effects use the vignette and close it a little bit more. So Mike, thank you so much for sending us your photo. Always a pleasure to see them. Take care and send us more of them in the future if you can. Moving on the next photographer, we have a Pedro. Pedro, we have 2 images from you. I know you send us more, but as I mentioned on the beginning of the show, we can only really do 1 or 2 photos per photographer per week. We have almost 40 photographers to look at this week, so we just need to be careful and we need to keep it manageable. So we have 2 images we wanted to look at. First, there is this kind of building in the middle of the fields with nice warm sky, and then this one is an evening capture with lovely street and a very dramatic sky. So let's have a look at your camera setting first of all. There isn't any, and on this one there is. So this one was with the iPhone 11, which is cool. ISO 800 f2 1/25th of a second. Now when it comes to phones and phone photography, the settings on the camera are usually a little bit different than what we would normally do with the camera, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now the sharpness is kind of there, but there is also lots of noise created with the camera itself, so you can see it on the kind of walls, and you can see the noise actually what it does. It creates like a grain, and it actually makes some parts of the image really kind of melt together, so it takes away some of the sharpness. So that's something I would start with by looking at. Also, it seems I'm not sure about the light. I'm not sure what was happening there, but you can really see that there was some sky adjustments done here. It's really visible at this part of the image, and it's visible over the tree as well, because the back parts of the sky really don't correspond with some parts. Then this one kind of completely disappear. So I think rather than a technical part, this is what I would be looking at, how to make sure that I can do as natural edit as possible. This almost, when I look at it like this, it almost looks like a watercolor painting, And if it's the effect you were going for, it works. If not, then it's a shame. But that's about it. Talking about technical part on this one. So the sharpness is there, but again, not 100%. So I don't know if it's the ISO or if it's the camera setting which creates this kind of melting effect together, which you can really see on this, and this. You get quite nice glow around the lights, which I think works. But again, similarly, I guess maybe you done some sky replacement to it or something, because you can see blobs of effects which is not really working, and here as well. So just something again to kind of keep an eye on, Pedro, and making sure that it's done as realistically as possible. When it comes to the night photography, sometimes the sky replacement needs to be done using selections rather than other programs, and it's just something to kind of work on. If you want, make sure you write in the comments what application you use for the sky replacement, and maybe I can then guide you to see what would work the best for you. Now, talking about the composition, I think this one is actually quite cool. I think it's well composed. I would maybe just make sure that it's straightened by using the geometry tool here in Lightroom. See if we use the auto, it work. So then this, more some this, or use the guided tool. Yeah. So this is a little bit more realistic. Other than that, I think it works. I think it has a nice depth of field. The message is quite clear here. And all in all, the idea is quite good. On this one, similarly, I think, Pedro, you have a very good eye for composition. You have an idea of what you want to do, but I think it's the post-processing where maybe there is a still opportunity of improvement, because the street is nice. It gives a nice flow. I like the glow around the lamps. I think that works very well, but it needs work in the post-processing. So that brings us to the post-processing. And before doing anything else and worrying anything else, you really need to look at how you can remove the ISO and the noise. And second, how you can make sure that when you do the sky replacement, it's as natural and not visible as possible. So that would be my main task to start with. If again you want, make sure you write in the comments which application you're using for the sky replacement, and then I can guide you and tell you where to take it from there. Now, moving on the next photographer, we have a Sushant, and we have two pictures here. Let's have a look at the technical details of the camera. So Samsung, I'm assuming maybe mobile phone captures, which there is nothing wrong with it. However, technical details, ISO 104, f1.8, it doesn't say the shutter speed, which is always a bit tricky. Now, looking at it like this, it's kind of sharp, pretty much all the way through, which is cool. No texture in the sky, but when you zoom in, you really start to see kind of blur and softness of the main image. So when you kind of zoom out, it's cool. Once you zoom in, you start to see the sharpness. So you could see if you could maybe push the sharpness a little bit by using the Lightroom tool. So to do something like this. And then of course you need to keep an eye on the noise. You see some parts of the image almost looks like they're called watercolor painted. So something to kind of keep an eye on for the future. Now, the light isn't crazy. It's probably coming from somewhere here and it's not great. And again, the lack of the texture in the sky makes it a little bit flat in overall. Now, when we talk about this one, it's interesting. It's almost like a still life photography. Again, using a Samsung camera, ISO 101, f1.8, 1,000 of a second, the shutter speed. It's interesting because even with f1.8, it doesn't actually create depth of field, which I think in this case would work really well. I think it would be great if you would just focus on the statue and the behind would be kind of semi-blurry. I think that would look very cool, which is not the case. And I think it's a little bit of a shame. Maybe the framing could be also a little bit tighter on the actual bike itself. I would definitely frame out the plant on the top and maybe leave it like something like this. Now, talking about composition, I quite like this one. I would, again, work on making sure that the background would be a little bit more blurry, but altogether the statue works. It's a nice tight crop in, and I think it works. On this one, what I would make sure next time is that I'm in the center, so I have a really nice balanced view, specifically when the two roads going each way. So I would go a little bit more there, focus directly in front, and really use the leading lines, creating a balanced composition. Next thing, really important for these kind of photos, is to use the geometry and making sure that everything is straight, like these lampposts. Because it's kind of really all over the place, but something like this, and then kind of seeing it from there. I would definitely crop away the sky because it doesn't add anything to the image. So I would get something like this and maybe take it from there. Now, post-processing, first thing I would do, I would look at the dehaze and see if that would help me a little to remove some of the kind of fog. So then you get something like this. Then you can really push the contrast and add a little bit of vibrance. And that's about where I would leave it and take it from. On this one, I would just have a look at the effect and add some vignette. And maybe again, push the contrast. And in color, push the vibrance. And that's about it, Sushant. Thank you very much for sending us your photos. If you want me to look at the other ones, make sure you post them for the next week's episode. And until then, take care and send us more pictures. We have two more photographers. First one, Theo. I can't remember if I've seen your pictures last week, but I know that I've seen some of your captures before. So thank you very much for sending us your photos again. Let's jump into them. Back to Paris. Paris, my favorite city to photograph ever. So beautiful. So obviously we are in the Louvre here, and here on the bridge. So let's talk about it. Technically, starting with this one. So this was with Apple iPhone. Ooh, that's a very good picture for iPhone. Let's see if we have any settings. ISO 80, f1.8, 1/35th of a second. That is very impressive for iPhone. Technically, obviously, there is lots of sharpness in the foreground all the way to the house. That is very cool. The light is quite nice. I'm not 100% sure if you've done some adjustments to the sky or no, if you replace it or if it was like that. The light doesn't necessarily correspond. This seems to be very bright for what's happening in the sky itself. Also, there is kind of glow around this areas and this area. And you're getting kind of darker glow around the actual lampposts. So that's either with some adjustments to the sky. Also, sometimes it happens when we really push the post-processing. So it's something to kind of keep an eye on. The reflection is quite nice. The colors are nice. So all in all, Theo, technically quite well done. On this one, you're getting lots of glow around these parts. Dark glow and a bright glow. So either the sky wasn't like this, which I don't think necessarily is the case because you can kind of see it through the glass. What I think more is maybe pushing really the post-processing. And when I zoom in just really carefully, you can see the kind of dark borders, and then you can see the white glow around the different parts. It's not as visible here because obviously the sky is brighter here, so it's not that visible. But on this part, it's really visible. Also, it's a little bit too tight for me. I think I know exactly where you're standing. I think if you would have gone a little bit further, it would help. But that's about it. So technically, I think it's the glow I would be focusing on and seeing if I can do something about it. Now, talking about composition, I think this one is a bit tight. Everything is kind of leaning as well. As you can see, this building is kind of leaning towards that side. So, I mean, if we would go in a geometry and try to kind of fix it, once you try to fix it, it obviously cuts some parts of the image away, which is always a shame. And then it's really tight on this side and on this side. So next time, do 2 steps back. Anytime I capture now anything like this, these kind of buildings, I always look at it and think, okay, I would like to frame it like this. And then I do step or 2 back, or obviously zoom the lens, and I capture whole bit of extra space. So I can do cropping afterwards. And I always know that I have an extra space for whatever I would need to include later. It's something what I learned by photographing for magazines and editorials, because you only really have one chance to go somewhere and you want to make sure that you get the most out of the photo shoot. Now, when it comes to composition, on this one, I think the flow is really nice here. I think it's obviously all about the bridge. The people gives us again a little bit of sense of scale, so that also helps. So all in all, Theo, I think it's quite cool. Composition wise, I think both of them, this one just need a little bit more space. This one is very well done. So altogether, well done. Now, post-processing, I don't think I need to really add anything. On this one, it's a bit too blue. So I would just double check the white balance, but just a touch, maybe something like this. But this one, I think both of them, you need to see what's up with this glow and with the edges. That would be my first thing before doing anything else, to make it as natural and as realistic as possible. You have a beautiful city, you have a beautiful scenes, definitely good eye for composition. So I think the post-processing is where you need to look at and see how you could push the images more towards the natural look. Now we have one more photographer to look at in landscape photography, and that's Vanessa. Vanessa, we have two images, one here and one here. So let's have a look at it. Vanessa, looking at it here, I'm wondering what's these black parts, because it seems like they're supposed to be shadows, but they're way too dark, and some of them are a little bit off and maybe thick. So I'm a little bit confused here. The sky is nice. So, okay, let's have a look at the technical, and there is no technical part here. Also, the image is a little bit small, but I'm looking at the image. I quite like what I see here. The foreground is quite nice. The trees are very nice. The sky is very nice, but these shadows, I'm not 100% sure about, Vanessa. So something to kind of look at. So we can have a look at it later. Now, talking about this one, the birds, the sky, the overall scene, quite nice. I think looking at it, maybe there was some adjustment done to the sky. I like the glow in overall. So let's see if we have no details for the camera on this one. That's a shame. But anyway, looking at it like this. So sharpness all the way from here to the back. So that's good. Interesting light with a little bit of a glow, which I quite like. The exposure, I think it's quite good. The framing is interesting. I like that the whole tree is there with all the kind of chunks here. I think that works quite nicely too. So all in all, well done on this one. Technically on this one, well, the sharpness is on the trees. There is a sharp foreground. There is a texture in the sky. The light is interesting if it's the original sky. And that's where I would leave it. Now, composition. So you have your foreground here, your middle ground, your background. So that way it works. The depth works quite well. Yeah, it's a kind of clear, nice landscape here. And on this one, I really like the birds. I think they add a little bit of a movement. I like the kind of depth of field created with this tree and with these trunks. And all in all, together, I think it works quite nicely when it comes to composition on this one. Now, talking about post-processing, keep an eye on the white balance on this one. That would be my first thing. So I think this is a little bit more natural, so less green and maybe a little bit cooler all in all. So that's where I would kind of take it from. Then I would definitely close it a little bit with vignette. So something like this. And you can easily create radial gradient around the sun, create something like, and add a little bit of an exposure and a warmth like this. And when you bring down the clarity, it actually creates quite nice glow. And overall, quite helps. So this is where I would leave it. And then you get something like this. And it's very, very nice. You know, it's nice thing put together. The sky works, the sun works, the composition is nicely done, and that's about it. Now on this one, first I think the white balance in the sky is a little bit strange. Let's see if we can do something about it in auto. I think this is much more natural, so that's where I would start with. Now you can either do it for the whole picture like this, or you can go into masking and then select sky. Should take a moment, and then you can kind of adjust the sky from here. So this I think is a little bit more natural. And then most importantly, Vanessa, I would focus on the shadows. So if it's like a comp site you were trying to create, judging based on the really sharp edge, I think everything work until the shadows. So either I wouldn't put the shadows there, which, to be honest, I understand that the sun was supposed to be going there, but on some of the tree, it's still visible. So maybe I would go for a sky which doesn't have a sun on it here. Or if you're going to do shadows, I would look at the different ways to do it. You can kind of copy the trees, paste them back, make them a little bit blurry. There is a whole way around it. You can find lots of different tutorials on YouTube. Or just start with something a little bit less complex. Anyway, I totally appreciate you trying. It's a little bit too visible that it's not natural, the shadows, but please don't take this as you shouldn't try. You totally need to try. It's just you need to kind of either start with something a little bit simpler or work on it and see where you can take it. Work on and see how you can create the shadows a little bit differently. And in fact, if you want, you can bring it into the group and we can kind of see how we could maybe put it together and take it from there. Anyway, Vanessa, I'm looking forward to seeing your captures in the future. Thank you very much for joining us. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us in the future, make sure you head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/review. That's where you can find all the upcoming dates. You can find the links where you can upload your photos and you can join us already for the next week's episode. So take care. Thank you very much for joining me today and keep shooting.